Welcome everyone, this is Madame Morbs and I have some creepy stories for you today. I have never been a runner. In fact, I hate running. Why does that matter? Because I met my girlfriend Jenna and it was love at first sight. And what does Jenna love almost more than life itself? Of course, running. Which prompted me in my love-addled brain to declare that I loved it too. When she asked me if I wanted to go for a run with her as a first date, I jumped at the chance. Never mind that I spent the whole time feeling like I was going to vomit up a lung. Because Jenna wasn't someone who went on a light jog. No, she was someone that treated a run like she had something to prove. And she wasn't just a runner. She was a trail runner. It wasn't like I'm in bad shape. I go to the gym and lift weights. I just really hate running. But for Jenna, I was willing to give it another chance. I put on my usual gym shoes and hoped for the best. Our first date consisted of me jumping over tree limbs and slipping on loose gravel, wheezing out questions and icebreakers as Jenna leapt and bounded like gravity and oxygen just affected her differently. Whether she admired my tenacity or was just willing to give me a chance, Jenna ignored my sweat-soaked body and gave me a big hug at the end of our date. She smiled at me as she invited me for another run the next weekend. I decided then and there that this woman was either going to be my wife one day, or she was going to be the death of me. No matter what the outcome, I was in. With time, I built my endurance and no longer thought I was going to die after every date. Jenna and I spent almost all of our free time together, and I was learning how to keep up with her. I'd never been happier. There was one trail that Jenna had always wanted to run, but never had the chance. It was one that you really needed good weather to do. The trail would sometimes flood in bad weather, and there are mudslides in the area, so every time we planned on trying the trail, something would happen that would mean we had to cancel. I would pretend to be disappointed, but truthfully, I wasn't. There was something about the trail, beyond the apparent danger of mudslides and wet feet, that made me nervous. Finally, my luck ran out. Jenna declared that the next weekend the weather was going to be perfect, and we were finally going to tackle the trail. It was also her birthday weekend, so I feigned excitement about the plan. We got up early and made it to the trailhead as the sun was coming up. Immediately, I knew this run was going to be different than any of the others. It was so much harder than I had expected, and immediately set about kicking my butt. I half listened as Jenna raved about the cave system accessible at the top of the mountain, and the strange etchings on the walls and how she had always wanted to see them. My attention was on the muddy trail that seemed to slip and slide beneath my feet. There was leaf clutter hiding sharp rocks, and more than once I felt my balance going as the ground underneath me shifted and pitched me sideways. There was a drop at some points of the trail, and I had the delirious thought that the trail seemed to be trying to pitch me off. Jenna, as usual, ate up the trail under sure feet, all while keeping up a steady chatter of bright excitement. I was distracted, telling myself all of this was going to be worth it. My relationship with Jenna sometimes felt like a test of endurance, but in a way that always left me feeling stronger. I pictured repeating the hike someday when it felt like enough time had passed to justify the diamond engagement ring I'd already bought. It was while picturing Jenna saying yes to that question that I missed a step and ended up catching my foot in a bundle of roots sticking out of the ground. I heard a pop from my ankle as I went down. The pain took a second to hit me, but by the time Jenna made it back to my side, I knew I had really injured myself. I was pretty sure it was just a sprain, but it was a bad one. Jenna and I argued. She wanted to head back, but I knew we weren't far from the top. I told her to go on ahead and that it would help to walk on the sprain. I would take it easy and meet her up there. Despite her worry, Jenna was easy to convince. She really wanted to see the caves and promised to head back down to meet me once she'd seen everything. Walking up the trail was painful and slow going. I thought about stopping and waiting for Jenna to come back, but the longer we were separated, the more worried I became. A storm was tracking by, and even though it wasn't set to hit the mountain, the sky got dark with the clouds racing overhead. It made me move even faster. Suddenly, I was terrified of what I was going to discover at the end of the trail. When I finally made it there, the outlook was empty. I barely even felt the pain from my ankle anymore as I yelled for Jenna. Just when I was getting really panicked, Jenna emerged from one of the cave systems, crawling on her hands and knees. I ran to her, but she just shook me off as she stood up and asked in a dull voice if I was ready to go. We barely spoke on the way down. I limped ahead while she slowly meandered behind me. I kept thinking once we got home, everything would be all right. She dropped me off first and declined to come in. It was so unlike her. Usually she would have been fussing over my injury, but she wouldn't even look at me. This was weeks ago. Our friends think something happened and we broke up. I haven't bothered correcting them, because something did happen that day on the mountain. I just need to figure out what. That's why this weekend, I'm headed back to the trail. My ankle is healed and the weather should be good. This time, I'm going into the caves, and I'm not stopping until I get my Jenna back. In high school, I ran track and played tennis and basketball, and I was even in a soccer rec league. There wasn't much else to do in the town I grew up. But this story is about my time running track and what happened that changed the course of my life. So, my coach would set up practice runs for us. He said he found a trail that would work well to train for an upcoming meet. I had my buddy Eddie, who would always do the run with me. She was actually taller than I was, but I was a bit faster, so we always ended up running at the exact same speed. The running path wound around the woods surrounding our school, and pretty soon we were alone on the trail. This particular day, I was slightly hungover. It was a rainy Friday, and I had gone to visit my older sibling at college the night before, and ended up being invited to a party. It was completely unlike me, but I had had a few too many drinks, and my sibling had to drive me all the way home, while I had to beg my mom for a ride to school that morning. Yeah, she had pretty quickly figured out what had happened. I was also grounded for the weekend. So it had already been a long and terrible day, and then we were told we had to get a training session in before we could leave for the night. Despite drinking both Pedialyte and Gatorade, my hangover was threatening to come back with a vengeance. I had already puked once on the run, and I also had to pee really badly. There was a point on the run where I couldn't hold it any longer and ended up telling Eddie I had to stop and take a break to go to the bathroom. She agreed to wait for me, so I went off into the woods to do my business and see if it made me feel any better. When I first saw the body in the woods, I really thought it was a mannequin. I got closer with the intention of taking a picture when I realized something was wrong. The mannequin's black hair looked realer than it should, and the skin I could see wasn't plasticky. It almost looked blue. I screamed without realizing I was screaming until Eddie burst into the woods near me. I just pointed at the body and kept screaming. Eddie calmed me down enough that we realized we should move away from the body in case it was a crime scene and that we needed to call the authorities. Only the reception was crap out in the woods, and we ended up needing to finish the trail to get back to a signal. It was faster to get to the exit, so after Eddie tied a yellow hair scrunchie on a tree limb, we ran for it. My hangover somewhat retreated under the panic and adrenaline. When we got to the parking lot, we finally found a connection and were able to call for help. Once the cops showed up, we retraced our steps to the part of the trail where we spotted Eddie's yellow scrunchie. It was starting to get darker in the woods because of a storm due later, and the atmosphere was really creepy. Everything was starting to sink in that we had really seen a dead body. Only when we took the cops to the place where the body was, instead of the body that we had seen, there was a mannequin in the same place. It looked completely different to the body that we had seen before. It had blonde hair and no clothes on. Eddie and I just stared at each other, dumbfounded. The more we tried to explain to the cops, the more they dismissed us as two panicked students. I started to feel crazy, and with it getting darker and darker and the cops starting to get pissed, we had no choice but to give up and head back to the parking lot. Eddie gave me a ride home and we barely spoke, except when she dropped me off, she said quietly that she knew what we had seen, and I agreed. The next school day, I was in the locker room alone as I was waiting for my mom to pick me up, and the track coach came in to find me. He asked if I had fun in the woods. I didn't know what to say, thinking he was teasing me for Eddie and I thinking we'd found a body that turned out to be a mannequin. But he kept asking questions. If I had been scared, what I thought I saw, if I'd ever seen a dead body before. All of these questions seemed weird and vaguely threatening, especially with that creepy smile on his face. Finally, he laughed and told me he was just messing around, and then the smile slipped and he took a step closer. He warned me not to go around talking about what I had seen. I said that I wouldn't. I really hadn't planned on it. The police had been pissed enough, and I wasn't looking to make things worse. There was something about the conversation that I couldn't shake. I realized one of the questions he had asked referenced the black hair, like couldn't I tell the difference between a wig and someone's black hair? The mannequin had blonde hair, but the body we thought we saw had black hair. I was scared and ended up dropping out of track. Soon after, my mom was offered a job where we would have to move. She mentioned it in passing, planning on turning it down because she didn't want me to have to start over at a new school my senior year. But I encouraged her to take it. I wanted out of that creepy town. We moved away. Eddie was the only person I was sad to leave behind, but she ended up going far away to college once she graduated anyway. I dropped most sports, even though my initial plan for college had been to get some sort of scholarship. I ended up going to trade school, which was fine by me. Last year, Eddie and I met up for a drink when we happened to be in the same place at the same time. We didn't talk about the body until we were a few drinks in. Eddie mentioned how the track coach had said something weird to her. It turned out back then he had cornered her as well, and said something about a woman with black hair being more likely to be a ghost. We just stared at each other and then changed the subject. Part of me wants to know what actually happened back then, but then another part of me hopes I never find out. I get brilliant ideas sometimes. After a bad breakup where I caught my boyfriend in bed with my ex-best friend, I was at loose ends of what to do. Signing up for a marathon seemed like a great idea at the time. I needed something to disrupt rotting in my bed feeling sorry for myself. Training went okay, but I immediately knew I needed new running shoes. Affording a new apartment on my own meant I didn't have extra cash, so I went to the thrift store. As I was about to leave, I found a pair of running shoes in my size. They looked new except for a name scrawled in marker on the bottom. The name said Arnold in a loopy script. That didn't bother me. In fact, it made the shoes feel kind of special. But right away, something was strange. I started going on long runs and making great time. But I wouldn't remember the runs afterwards. Other running friends said this was normal. They would go into a kind of autopilot and get lost in their thoughts. I was too embarrassed to correct them. That wasn't what was happening to me. It was like I was blacking out. I could remember putting on my running shoes and going outside. Then it was like I would pop back into existence back home, sweaty and still breathing heavily. My phone would have a record of my running route and speed. I wouldn't remember any of it. Finally, I went to the doctor to see if anything was wrong. My tests came back normal. My doctor was somewhat dismissive about my concerns. In fact, she was a runner herself, and pretty much just got excited talking about the upcoming marathon. I felt like I was losing it, and somehow talked myself into the idea that what was happening was normal. Nobody else was worried, so why should I be? Plus, I was making really great time and running longer and longer distances. In hindsight, I should have been concerned, especially when I went on a run with one of my friends who was also running the marathon. We decided to do 20 miles a few weeks before the marathon. He came over and we went out. When I came back to myself, I was standing on the street and my friend was yelling at me. I had no idea what was going on. He told me he couldn't believe I would say anything so vile, and then turned around and ran away. I checked and saw that we had been running for less than an hour and had gone about 10 miles. I walked home trying to rack my brain to remember what I'd said. Even though I felt like I should care, I didn't. All I seemed to care about was going for longer and longer runs. The day of the marathon, I was just excited to finally run the whole thing. The only part that made me sad was the idea that I wouldn't remember it. As I was getting ready, I went to put on my shoes. For some reason, the idea of wearing my usual running shoes made me feel sick. I grabbed an old pair and put those on instead. They wouldn't be as good as my others, but I felt more comfortable. I spotted my friend in his running group and tried to wave hi, but he ignored me. The race started and I felt great. I was also aware, no blacking out. It was incredible. The energy of the race had me going strong. About a mile in, I got a weird feeling. There was someone running right behind me. I turned around and saw a bald guy with a weird smile on his face. He was right on my heels, his eyes trained onto mine. When I moved to let him pass, he moved with me. I sped up, and so did he. Pretty soon, I was running as fast as I could to get away from him. No matter what I did, when I looked behind me, he would be right there, smiling that weird smile. I thought about stopping running or even quitting the race, but I had come so far. I wasn't going to let some creep ruin it for me. I decided to completely ignore him and concentrate on running the best that I could. Before I knew it, I was in the last mile of the race. Despite tuning the guy out, by now I could practically feel his hot breath on my neck as I ran. I was so angry and ready to be away from this guy. Soon, I could see the finish line. As I was nearing it, someone grabbed my shoulder and spun me around, nearly making me fall. I got so mad I instinctively shoved him away from me. Even as he was falling, he was still smiling. I backed away as he fell to the ground. Nobody around us seemed to notice the man I'd pushed. They were all looking at me, since I'd stopped running and was facing them. As I turned to run to the finish line, I caught sight of the man's running shoes. They looked so familiar, just like the thrifted shoes I had used for training. Then I caught the underside of the left one. It had a name written there. Arnold, in loopy script. I ran for the finish line, refusing to look back. Once I finished the race, I kept running all the way home. When I got there, I couldn't find my running shoes, the ones that said Arnold on the bottom. I don't understand what happened, but I decided not to think about it. I think I'm going to take up knitting next.